From the Ticats Audio Network, this is Ticats Today with Steve Milton.
It's Sunday, June 2nd. This is Ticats Today, and I'm Steve Milton. Now, although Ticats played Friday night in Guelph, losing 25-14 to Toronto, that exhibition game was irrelevant except for what the tape and the naked eye showed to the coaching and players' personnel staffs, who had to stay up most of the night analyzing what they saw in order to pair the roster to season opening size on Saturday. Now, we're going to spend our time today with our takes on those cuts. So it was Heartbreak Saturday. 29 potential Tiger Cats were released, including 6 who played games for the team last year. Surprises? Yes. Particularly along the defensive line, where Canadians Mason Bennett and Anthony Federico were set loose. The popular Bennett was the Ticats' first-round draft choice, 8th overall in 2020 out of North Dakota, and he played 43 games over the 3 seasons here, including some starts. Federico, the Niagara Falls native who played 2 seasons for the junior Hamilton Hurricanes before he was drafted, was the Ticats' top choice, 17th overall 2 years ago when they didn't have a first-rounder. Many of Saturday's moves were impacted by GM Ed Hervey and his player personnel staff bringing in a number of players over just the last few days, including veteran Canadian defensive lineman David Ménard, which I assumed would actually strengthen the case for Bennett and Federico because it seemed to indicate that the Ticats were going to use a Canadian much of the time on the defensive line. Now, I guess they still will, it appears, but mostly as a rotational player playing through several positions, which Ménard can do. Steven Dunbar Jr. was brought back to the team this last week, followed by the arrival of former Indianapolis Colt receiver Dezmon Patmon, who was just outstanding in Friday night's loss to Toronto and Guelph. He went over the top against great coverage to pull down a ball with one of the great over and backs that you'll ever see in any league. Now, he goes on the practice roster, but I don't expect him to stay on there for very long. He's that good. Now, those two, Dunbar and Patmon, pushed a lot of players down the receivers depth chart, including Omer Bayless, who played 6 games here last year with a couple of touchdowns and slotted into a starter spot for a while during training camp, but he was released on Saturday. Kalen Geiger, who'd been a starter in drills and in the preseason, showed some promise returning kicks, but that job is for now in the hands and feet of Lawrence Woods III, who has looked good, and Geiger moves to the practice roster as a reserve receiver. Woods was another late signee, agreeing to return to Hamilton right before training camp after the BC Lions released him. And after the Ticats brought in Nick Constantino on Tuesday, the same day Ménard and Patmon arrived, there were now 3 global punters in camp. The odd man out was Bailey Flint, who was punting well last year until he had to leave the team for personal reasons. Constantino, the Ticats' first-round choice in this year's global draft, was once a finalist for the Ray Guy Award as the best U.S. college punter, and he can also handle some place kicking and kickoff duties. Mark Leggio will be the field goal and convert kicker. And Corey Vedvik, who arrived from Saskatchewan last year after Flint had to depart, was placed on the practice roster. It remains to be seen how Milanovich and Hervey will distribute their Canadians across the starting rosters, and that's a tricky equation problem that dates back to Canadian linebacker Jordan Williams, who was obtained in a trade with the Argos way back in January, suddenly retiring in May. So let's look at those Canadians for a moment. After the 3 interior linemen on offense, at center David Beard and guards Brandon Revenberg and Coulter Woodmansey, inside receiver Keandre Smith, and safety Stavros Katsantonis, the Ticats need to find at least 2 more starting spots for nationals to reach the minimum of 7. One would likely be a second Canadian receiver, and another could be rotated through on defense, at Sam linebacker or on the defensive line. And there's the possibility of using the complex CFL import rules, which permit a veteran with 3 years as a Ticat or 5 years in the CFL to be used as a quote-unquote designated nationalized American who can replace a pre-designated national for up to 25 snaps in a game. And we do know that is a confusing set of numbers, and we'll get into it more deeply if the Ticats use that option during the season. There's also tight end. Milanovich has stated he'd like to design a package with true NFL tight ends, which is why 3 contenders, 2 Americans and a global, were brought in. But because of injuries, for most of the camp, a lot of the tight ends formations have featured a 6th offensive lineman or one of the fullbacks, and they're all Canadians. Americans Michael Ezeka out of UCLA and Cameron McDonald from Florida State were released on Saturday, while Johnny Robinson, the former North Carolina State basketball player who qualifies as a global, is the one classic style tight end remaining. Now, to make a tight end formation believable as more than a rush-only set, there has to be some possibility that the tight end can run a good route and catch a pass. Now, fullback Felix Gauthier qualifies, as does the versatile running back Ante Milanovich Litra, who is fairly fast and runs thoughtful patterns. He was the Ticats' short yardage quarterback Friday night and converted all 5 of his tries at a first down, including a touchdown. So occasional tight end work is certainly not beyond his scope. There are other possibilities, and it's likely that they'll evolve as time goes on. We'll definitely keep track of those for you. Special teams played a very significant role in the overall roster selection, as they always do. And that was the flip side of the coin for the Canadian defensive linemen like Bennett and Federico. In the offseason, the Ticats signed American defensive lineman Dwayne Hendricks and Brandon Barlow to join All-Star Casey Sales, also an American on the line, and they need at least one backup for them who would be American. So to have a Canadian-only lineman spot would require even more depth replacements, and the Cats couldn't carry too many defensive linemen on the game day roster. At least that's my take on it, because their body types are suitable for only a few spots on special teams. Noticeably, and this speaks to this point, among the weekend cuts, only 2 linebackers, one of the core positions contributing to special teams, were cut, and another 2024 draftee Ryan Baker went to the practice roster. Brandon Kemp, the offensive tackle who started in 10 games for the Ticats last year, was put on the practice roster, but tackle Kendrick Sarter and guard Jacob Zott from McMaster, who both played last year, were released. Hamilton native Tyler Ternosky, the 4th-year receiver who's been injured, was placed on the practice roster, as was sophomore safety Patrick Burke Jr., another Canadian. Making cuts, especially ones as other CFL teams are setting their roster and really don't have any room left, is always one of the most difficult days of the year for the coaching and personnel staffs, something Scott Milanovich had addressed earlier in the week.
It's probably the worst part of the job. Most coaches on our staff have played, so I've been cut. I've been through it on a personal level on both sides of it. So we got good guys on this team. We got good players. I told them that yesterday. We've got some good players here that may not make this team, and I'm all for them going over wherever they can go and finding a chance to play. And there's potential that we have injuries and bring them back if that didn't happen. So yeah, it's uncomfortable for players. It's uncomfortable for staff. You don't want to crush anybody's dream, and that's the hard part about the next couple of days.
Okay, so with all that done, the regular season starts with Monday's day 1 of practice, but for Friday's opener in Calgary, and we'll be talking all week about that. Thanks for giving us your time today, and join us again for Monday's episode when we take a look at Bo Levi Mitchell's first return to Calgary in another team's uniform.
This has been Ticats Today with Steve Milton. Catch it on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.